So I put that video up there for a few different reasons. The first one is because it's awesome. So there's that. And the second one is because I am super excited for the new Star Wars movies. The first one coming out in December, so that's really soon. So just gotta get jacked about that. How are you guys doing? Good? Solid? It's a small group tonight.
Look, I have Star Wars.
I'm so proud of you. Oh, man. So, we're just gonna continuation. It's gonna be a continuation of these Kairos talks that we've been talking about. So Aaron talked last week about the introductory stuff. So we're looking at Jesus' home. So he's back home at the feast of the tabernacle, yes. And so he's hanging out with these Pharisees, because that's what he does in the temple. And he's talking about how, like, to have an everlasting life, you must eat of my flesh and drink of my blood. And they're not, like, super into that. I mean, I don't know about you, I'm not a cannibal, I hope you're not cannibal, so that's just the thing that, like, initial reaction, that would be kind of weird if the dude that just is coming home and it's like, yeah, homecoming, it's awesome, and he's like, I'm a cannibal. Not really, he's not a cannibal, he's Jesus, he's not doing that at all. But that was the thing that he was conveying. And so, Jesus is coming home, and he's talking about all these moments, and we're talking about the Kairos moments, which are just God time. So it's not the non-linear moments, the ones that you're like, wow, that's really neat. Those kind of moments. Those are those Kairos moments. And so just keep those in mind. So we're talking about homecomings. So Jesus is coming home back to his hometown. And so you know how there's a lot of really cool homecomings where it's like a parent coming back from like a long trip and he's bringing a toy to his daughter, or like soldiers that are coming back from war times and they come back and their families are all there and stuff like that. Well, I've got a video for you to watch real fast. That's one of my favorites on that little nugget.
Well, we'll try and describe this and not fall to pieces while doing so. This is Major Robert Sides of the Air Force. His son doesn't know that he is back from a tour of duty until now. Gone for a year.
So just wipe away your tears. It's fine. It's normal. I cried like 15 times. That's on MLB Network on like a regular basis, and I still have to wipe tears away every time I watch it. So you think of like a normal homecoming, and they're all really happy, and everybody's like, "Yeah, you're back. I'm really excited to see you." Well, when Jesus came back home, they're like, I don't know about you, but you're kind of weirding me out a little bit. And that doesn't help when he goes and starts talking about like cannibalistic type mentalities and stuff. And so he's going back home and he does all this stuff and he's talking to the Pharisees and doing his thing, and they're like, they call him a demon because he's talking about those types of things. So now we're going to get into story time with Jesus. And so we're going to go to John 8, 48 through 59, and I'm going to read that real fast. So, the Jews answered him, "Aren't we right in saying that you are a Samaritan and demon-possessed?" And I call him a Samaritan because nobody likes the Samaritans. That's just a thing. And he was demon-possessed because he's talking about eating stuff. "So, I am not possessed by a demon," said Jesus, "but I honor my Father and you dishonor me. I am not seeking glory for myself." Remember that. That's the thing he says. "But there is one who seeks it, and he is the judge. Very truly I tell you, whoever obeys my word will never see death." At this they exclaimed, "Now we know that you are demon-possessed. Abraham died, and so did the prophets. Yet you say that whoever obeys your word will never taste death. Are you greater than our father Abraham? He died, and so did the prophets. Who do you think you are?" Jesus replied, "If I glorify myself, my glory means nothing. Remember that. My Father, whom you claim as your God, is the one who glorifies me. Though you do not know him, I know him. If I said I did not, I would be a liar like you," throwing some shade to some of those Pharisees. "But I do know him, and I obey his word. Your father Abraham rejoiced at the thought of seeing my day. He saw it and was glad. You are not yet 50 years old," they said to him. "And you have seen Abraham? Very truly I tell you," Jesus answered, "before Abraham was born, I am." At this, they picked up stones to stone him, but Jesus hid himself, slipping away from the temple grounds. So, Jesus is talking about how Abraham, who is like going to say saint because he's not a saint, like the patron being in the Jewish faith. And so Abraham is the father of all in many ways. And that eventually leads to Moses. And Moses, at his time where he's up on the mountain talking with God, God says, I am that I am. And so this is Jesus reiterating back to Exodus 3 and saying that before Abraham was, I am. So he has existed throughout this entire thing. He's been here the entire time. And that's something where the primary focus of what I'm going to talk about today is continuation of these Kairos moments, but specifically how Jesus became more by becoming less. So throughout this entire series, we're going to talk, it's going to come back to those types of things, where Jesus became more by sacrificing himself to become less. And so I want you guys to picture something really fast, if you would. So picture yourself sitting in a church, much, I guess, like this, and there's a dude talking. I guess that could be me. And so you're sitting here, and he's talking about like cannibalistic stuff, and he's talking about some other weird things, and you're like, I don't know about this. And you're just sitting here. So here's Jesus. He's doing his talk, and he's talking to all these Pharisees and being awesome and preaching like just knowledge bombs on people, and it's great. And they're just kind of sitting here. They're just like looking, kind of watching him, like with that like kind of half smile. Where they're like, and they're just kind of sitting, and they're pondering things. So they're just like sitting here. And then out of the blue, like Jesus gets done, and they're like, yeah, I think that's an awful idea. And they start grabbing stones and like throwing it at him, and he runs away. And Jesus is like, I did not expect this from coming home. But I mean, think about it. Like he's just sitting here, just talking, hanging out, and then these guys decide to, I don't know where they got the stones. I don't know if they're just like, if that's a thing that they have in the temple where they're just like, we need to have stones in preparation for when we have to kill somebody. But they had something, they picked them up and started throwing them at him. So Jesus has run away and trying to do that. Like how are you supposed to interact with that? And the crazy part is that, so obviously Jesus is doing all of these teachings. He's still really young. He's not going to be put on trial yet for his execution. But if you think about it, if you look back into the later part of that chapter, right after they tried to stone him, the Pharisees then started contemplating ways on how to kill Jesus and how to get him executed. And so it was the beginning of the end for Jesus. When he came home, it was the beginning of the end. And if you think about it in that weird way, like you think of those homecomings of like a father-son, I bet the father is not saying, well, I'm going to die now when he's coming back home. And here's Jesus knowing that this is basically the end for him. It's the beginning of the end for his life. And so he's going through all these things and trying to maintain this humble nature, becoming more by becoming less. Okay, so now I'm going to explain why I put the Obi-Wan video up there. One, again, it's awesome, so that's good. But the second part is, how many of you guys have seen Star Wars? I hope it's all of you. Oh, sad day. So with Star Wars, like obviously you know the part where Obi-Wan makes a sacrifice. Obi-Wan is the best character in Star Wars. If you disagree, then I'm sorry, you're wrong. I'm not sorry. Enough of the conversation. You're wrong. It's cool. So you've got Obi-Wan here, who's gonna try and make this sacrifice to make sure that his friends can survive and get off the Death Star and move on to other things. And so he says, if you strike me down, I will become more powerful than you can possibly imagine. And then he gets killed, and he technically becomes more powerful. He's a part of the Force. He helps Luke become awesome and defeat Darth Vader, and it's great. That's the thing. And so, like obviously, he made this sacrifice, and the sacrifice wasn't to be just like, well, I'm just gonna die because then I can become super powerful and just help myself. He's talking about that sacrifice is meant to help the rest of the Rebel Alliance and help the world and become awesome. So now you can say that when you're watching Star Wars, that it's kind of a churchy thing to do. So remember that. Anytime your mom's like, no, that's just weird crap, you'll be like, no, David, the intern, told me that it was okay to do. You can quote me on that, because I will say it's fine. So, the big part of what Jesus was focusing on is to live a life of sacrifice. And sacrifice sounds awful. Like, you don't want to be like, I don't want to sacrifice things. You think of it as being a thing like the Aztecs made sacrifices, and they were human sacrifices, and they were like cutting open hearts and they were dying. Like, that's not ideal. But what Jesus is talking about is he's talking about sacrifices with time, with money, with some of your energy, whether it's like a volunteering thing or even giving tithes at church. Just different stuff like that where you're making a sacrifice that's not exactly easy for you. So throughout the Bible, there's many places of where it's showing humility, where people are showing humility. A couple of them are in Proverbs and Psalms. So it's going to be Psalms 149:4. That's the first one. Alex.
Yeah. What did you say again?
Psalms 149:4.
You're not doing your job.
Thanks, boss. So, for the Lord takes delight in his people. He crowns the humble with victory. So there's one. And then the next one is Proverbs. And so the next one is, he mocks proud mockers, but shows favor to the humble and the oppressed. And so Jesus is going through his entire life being less. He's sacrificing himself. He eventually sacrifices himself in dying on a cross. And that's found in, I believe it's Philippians 2:6-8. I don't know if I have it on the slide, but yes, I do. Who, being in the very nature of God, did not consider equality with God something to be used to his own advantage. Rather, he made himself nothing, made himself more by being less, by taking the very nature of a servant, being made in human likeness, to the point where he eventually was killed. So Jesus makes this entire sacrifice and is willing to go through a life of sacrifice and humility. And that's something that we try and live, or we try and preach it on a regular basis, where you just have to remain humble, and you have to be a servant. You have to have a servant heart, and you have to do all these things where you're being less. And that's super hard to do. I don't know about you guys, but I don't have like a ton of time to give away for things. I don't have a ton of energy to I'm gonna go to the food pantry and start working for like 3 hours when I've got, there's homework, and there's sports, and then there's classes, and then there's more sports for some of you, and then you've got like video games, because those are like a thing that's super important, and you've got all of these things that take away your time. If you look at yourself at like a clock, like all 12 hours of that clock are filled with something. And if you're trying to say, like, okay, I'm going to sacrifice most of this time and give it away to somebody that honestly I don't think deserves it, like that's something that's really hard for us to do. We don't take the time to make a sacrifice because we honestly just don't care. And so you look at Jesus' life, and he's making these sacrifices the entire time. And these Kairos moments, the things that we're talking about here, are not necessarily focused specifically on the sacrifice part of things, but it's listening to what God's got to say to us. These God moments where like, boom, here it is. And most of the time, the issue that comes from this is that we don't take the time to think about what God's saying. God's like, hey, boom, and it's right there. And you're like, that's really neat, God. Thank you. This is pretty nifty. And then you're like, then a second later, like off to something else. Because it's not that it's not a big deal, but we just don't have the time to take. We're not going to take the time to be like, that's really important, God. I'm going to take some time to pray about it. I'm going to tell some friends about it. I'm going to go home and read about it. And then eventually figure out what you're trying to tell me. We're like, that's awesome. Okay, I'm done. And then you go off to the next thing. And you don't take the time to realize that. And we talk about all of this. We're trying to have these Kairos moments, and we just blow past them. We just go past them in the fastest amount of time that we possibly can. We're not focused on what God's trying to say to us. We're focused on the next thing we have on our time schedule. So if God's like interrupting things, like you're talking about the Chronos and the Kairos time. Chronos time being linear, chronological. And so we're running on this chronological scale, and God's like, BAM! And we're like, stop it! I don't have time for this. I don't want to take the time to say, God, I see what you're trying to tell me, and I hear what you're trying to tell me, but I don't have time for you. And then you move on. And that's something where we're not trying to do that, but it happens more often than not. And so if we look at, like, the hardest part of this is we're trying to make these sacrifices. We're trying to become less. And we're trying to be like Jesus. But the problem is, how can you become more by becoming less if there's nothing less for you to give? If you're running on empty, you can't give anything more. If you're running with no time for God, then you can't give any more time to other people. Because there's nothing else to sacrifice. You're looking at all of it, you look at the clock again. So you got 12 hours full of time. You can't put anything more in that. 24-hour day is done once it hits midnight. Like, it's done. Starts at midnight, ends at midnight, day after day after day. There's no extra time in that. You can't add more time to your life. And so if you're trying to add more time in being sacrificial, in being humble, and like doing things for people and being a servant, if you don't plot out that time or take the time to listen to what God's saying to you in these Kairos moments, then there's nothing else that's going to come of that. You get what I'm saying? You feel me? Yeah? Okay, I like nod heads. That's cool. That's really good. So it's that thing where like you can't become more by becoming less if there's nothing less to give. You can't give less than nothing. It's mathical. Like, it's one of those things you learn math. You can't divide by 0. You can't get less. I mean, you can get integers, but who cares about integers? That's crap. So you look at that, and you can't divide by 0. You can't get less than 0. You can't give any more if you've got nothing left to give. You know what I'm saying? You good. Sweet. So it's that thing where we're trying to figure out ways to sacrifice our time. We're trying to find ways to help people that we care about. We're trying to do the things that Jesus wants us to do. But until we recognize these God moments, these times where he's like, hold up a second, I got something really important I want to tell you. This is not life or death, but it sure as heck going to help you. And you're saying, okay, God, I'm listening. And then you're like a dog and you're just not paying attention and just turning around and doing something else. Like, you've got to focus on when God gives you these moments. These are not just regular moments that happen. It's that surprise that, here, I've got something important to tell you. Listen to what I'm saying. And you take that, and if you ingest it, chew it up a little bit, and try and think about what he's trying to tell you, that's where the rest of your life can kind of get panned out. Where you can take that time and understand what's going on in these moments. These moments that are not just normal moments. These are those God moments that we're talking about. And it's one of those, when you recognize like that these moments happen, and you take the time, and I'm saying take the time to notice them, that you can finally, like, that is when you can become less. When you take the time to realize these moments, take them for a second, and then you can become less. You can't just do it. You have to make an action plan. That's a big important thing to do. But you can't just be like, okay, God, let's do this. Boom, it's going to happen. You got to take the time and plan it out. You got to take the time and be open to what God's going to say to you. That is when you can become less. Is when you recognize. Like, the sacrifice for us is not making the actual sacrifice, but it's taking the time out of our busy days and taking that away from something that could be done that's maybe a little bit more fun, like playing video games or doing sports, and taking that time out of your day and sucking it into something different. And learning and figuring out, this is what God's trying to tell me. This is the important thing that he's trying to tell me, and take it and digest it and move it into something important into your life. So if you look around, there's not a ton of you guys here today, but look at all the volunteers that help us out on a weekly basis. We're not exactly we don't have a ton of time in our regular weeks. We take a ton of time to be here and hopefully drop some knowledge nuggets on you and like move into an entirely different thing where you can understand that this relationship with God is something that you need to have in your lives. And we love you guys. We love you guys a lot. And we want you to understand that we're here not because we like to have fun, but we also want you to understand this amazing relationship with God that can be had and that can move you into this amazing part of your life that is eventually high school and college and all this other stuff. But to do that, we have to sacrifice some time. And that's not easy. That's not easy at all. I got a lot of stuff going on. And I'm sure the rest of you, Lena's got a lot of stuff going on. All of us have things going on in our lives that we're going to take this time and we're going to be here because we love you guys. We care about that you're here. We're excited when you get here. And that's something that it just takes some time. So if you look at the basic premise of what Jesus is doing, he's becoming more by becoming less. He's making those sacrifices on his regular basis. He eventually sacrifices everything, including his life, to give you, me, all of us, a life that's worth living. And it's a thing that you can't just do it. You have to have both focus and an action plan. You can't just be like, okay, done, and you go for it. You have to understand that this is the thing that I need to do, and understand it. You take those moments that happen, and you think about it, and then you plan a course of action. Then you can get something done. When you take those moments, you let God be God, and you listen to what he's saying. That's all I gotta say today, but I'm just gonna pray real fast, and then you can go on and do your fun things. So, God, thank you for bringing us all here today. Thanks for blessing me with the ability to come and talk to Student Life people and you Element kids and the Crave kids and be able to be here and have you speak through me. God, I hope that some of my words have been able to sink into these kids, that they can understand that you've got so much planned for their lives, but when you're speaking, that we can take the time to notice it. Take the time to recognize that you've got something amazing to say for us, and that we need to take that thought, that word, that action, and turn it into something better. God, I pray that you keep us safe for the rest of the week, that you keep us unstressed and relaxed throughout these fun times until we can meet again next week. Pray that you bring us back again next week. Amen.
Amen.
Well done, David. Hey, one of the things David Fleis told me he does that I actually love that you're talking about this. You talk about taking time, and you said you started journaling, right? Was that something you said you started doing recently?
Yeah.
Any of you journal? Any of you hate journaling?
That's
Some
fair.
of you. I've tried. I don't want to put any kind of Jesus guilt on you, but one of the things I love that Fleis said was talking about how do we take the time to try to process what God is trying to say, and again. This is something that if you figure this out now, it's going to like bless you for the rest of your life. You're going to be able to hear from Christ. And so be thinking about that, like an action plan type piece. Journaling, trying to take time at the end of the day. It's an amazing spiritual exercise. Maybe put it on your Bible reading or whatever else. But thank you, Fleis. That was a great continuation on the week.